Hello, my name is Timothy Bennett. I'm 28 years old. I work as a freelance carpenter, mostly doing custom cabinets and furniture restoration. I live in a small apartment above Mr. Johnson's hardware store on Maple Street, and I thought I knew what wanting something meant until that Saturday afternoon when Angela Miller leaned against her kitchen refrigerator and whispered those words that changed everything. She stood there in her oversized sweater, hair falling loose around her shoulders, and said, "Everyone's upstairs. We have time." The way she looked at me in that moment, like she was offering me something precious and fragile, something that might disappear if I blinked too hard. I could hear the laughter from upstairs where her younger brother Larry was showing his friends some new video game, completely oblivious to the tension crackling between his older sister and me in the kitchen below. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I got to that moment, because it started 3 months earlier with a broken chair and the kind of coincidence that makes you wonder if the universe has a sense of humor. It was a Tuesday morning in early September when Larry Reyes knocked on my door. I'd known Larry since high school, though we'd never been particularly close. He was one of those guys who was friendly with everyone but close to few, always quick with a joke, but careful not to let anyone too far inside. I was sanding down an antique dresser when I heard his footsteps on the wooden stairs leading to my apartment. "Hey, Timothy," he called through the door. "You busy?" I wiped my hands on my jeans and opened the door to find Larry standing there with a sheepish grin, holding what looked like the remains of a dining room chair. The seat was completely separated from the back, and one of the legs hung at an angle that defied physics. "My mom's going to kill me," he said, hefting the broken furniture. "I was trying to fix a wobble and, well, let's just say I'm better with computers than carpentry. Think you could work some magic on this thing?" I took the chair from him, examining the damage. The joints had been stressed beyond their limits, probably from years of use and Larry's well-intentioned but misguided repair attempt. It was salvageable, but it would take time and patience. "I can fix it," I told him, "but it's going to take a few days. These old chairs, you can't just slap some glue on them and hope for the best. They need to be properly taken apart, cleaned, and reassembled." Larry's face lit up with relief. "You're a lifesaver, man. Seriously. My mom has had that chair since before I was born. It belonged to my grandmother. If I destroyed it, I'd never hear the end of it." That's when he mentioned his sister would be picking it up when it was ready. "Angela's coming back from Portland this weekend," he said. "She's moving back home for a while, helping Mom with some things. I'll have her swing by your place when the chair's done." I nodded, not thinking much of it at the time. I'd heard Larry mention his older sister over the years, but our paths had never crossed. She'd left town right after high school for college and then stayed on the West Coast for work. In my mind, she was just another name and another person from Larry's life that existed outside my small circle of experience. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you were watching from and hype this video in the comments. I'd love to know I'm not alone in thinking that sometimes the most ordinary moments can change everything. I spent the next 3 days working on that chair. It became a meditation of sorts, carefully removing each piece of old glue, sanding down the surfaces, checking the alignment of every joint. There's something peaceful about restoration work, about taking something broken and making it whole again. Each piece has its own story, its own character, and your job is to honor that while giving it new life. The chair was old, probably 1940s or 50s, with a solid oak frame and simple, elegant lines. Someone had loved this piece of furniture, had sat in it for countless meals, conversations, quiet moments. As I worked, I found myself wondering about its history, about the family that had gathered around the table it belonged to. Friday afternoon came, and I was putting the finishing touches on the chair when I heard footsteps on the stairs again. But these weren't Larry's heavy, familiar steps. These were lighter, more deliberate. There was a soft knock on the door, and when I opened it, I found myself face to face with Angela Miller. She was nothing like I'd expected. In my mind, I'd constructed some vague image based on Larry's occasional mentions, but reality was something else entirely. She stood about 5 feet 6 inches tall, with dark brown hair that caught the afternoon light streaming through the hallway window. She wore a simple green jacket over jeans and boots that looked like they'd seen some real walking. But it was her eyes that caught me off guard, deep brown and thoughtful, with a kind of quiet intelligence that made me feel like she was seeing more than I was showing. "Hi," she said, and her voice had a slight rasp to it, like she'd just woken up or had been talking for hours. "I'm Angela, Larry's sister. I'm here about a chair." Right, yes, I managed, stepping back to let her in. Timothy Bennett. Come in, please. She stepped into my workshop apartment, and I watched as she took in the space. It's not much to look at, really. The main room serves as both living area and workshop, with hand tools hanging on pegboard walls, several pieces of furniture in various stages of restoration, and the persistent smell of wood stain and linseed oil. Most people who aren't used to this kind of work find it overwhelming, but Angela moved through the space like she belonged there. This is incredible, she said, running her fingers along the edge of a mahogany table I'd been refinishing. You did all this yourself? Most of it, I replied, suddenly self-conscious about the sawdust on my shirt and the fact that I probably smelled like turpentine. The chair's over here. I led her to where her grandmother's chair sat, now fully restored and gleaming with a fresh coat of finish. The transformation was dramatic. What Larry had brought me as a broken, sad piece of furniture now looked like it could grace any dining room with dignity. Angela stopped in front of the chair and was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched the back, tracing the curve of the wood with her fingertips. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I remember this chair. I used to sit in it when I was little, helping my grandmother snap green beans or peel potatoes. She'd tell me stories about when she was young, about meeting my grandfather during the war." She looked up at me, and there were tears in her eyes. "How much do I owe you?" I told her the price, which was probably less than I should have charged, but something about the way she looked at that chair made me feel like I'd been part of something important, something that went beyond money. As she wrote out the check, she asked about my work, about how I'd learned restoration. I found myself telling her about my grandfather, who taught me woodworking when I was a kid, about how I'd fallen into furniture restoration almost by accident after college when I couldn't find work in my original field of graphic design. "It's funny," she said, handing me the check. "I work in marketing now, but I've always been drawn to things that last. There's something about taking care of old things, preserving them, that feels important." "What kind of marketing?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Mostly small businesses," she said. "I help them tell their stories, find their voice. I was working for an agency in Portland, but I got tired of helping big corporations pretend they cared about things they didn't actually care about. I'm thinking about starting my own consultancy, focusing on businesses that actually make a difference." We talked for another 20 minutes, and I found myself completely absorbed in the conversation. Angela had a way of listening that made you want to keep talking, to dig deeper into whatever you were discussing. She asked thoughtful questions about the restoration process, about the history of the pieces I worked on, about what drew me to this particular kind of work. When she finally said she needed to go, I felt a strange sense of loss, like something good was ending too soon. "I'll help you get the chair to your car," I offered. "Actually," she said, "I walked here. Larry said it wasn't far, and I wanted to see the neighborhood. I didn't really think about how I was going to get a chair home." I laughed. "I can drive you if you want. It's no trouble. Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "It's not an imposition," I said, and I meant it. The drive to the Reyes house took about 15 minutes, and we spent the time talking about the town, about how it had changed since Angela had been away. She pointed out places that had been important to her growing up, a coffee shop where she'd spent hours studying, a park where she'd had her first kiss, a bookstore that had closed down while she was in college. "It's strange," she said as we pulled into her driveway, "coming back to a place that's the same but different, like looking at a photograph of yourself from 10 years ago. You recognize it, but it doesn't quite feel real." I helped her carry the chair into the house, and that's when I met her mother, Julie Cox, a warm, energetic woman who immediately insisted I stay for coffee. The kitchen was the heart of the house, clearly, with a large wooden table surrounded by mismatched chairs, one of which was now the restored piece I'd worked on. "Angela, show Timothy the rest of the chairs," Julie said, bustling around making coffee. "Maybe he can tell us about them." The other chairs were clearly from the same set as the one I'd restored, but they were in various states of wear. A couple had loose joints, one had a crack in the seat, and another was missing a spindle from the back. "They could all use some attention," I said, examining each piece. "But they're good quality, worth saving." That's when Angela suggested something that surprised me. "What if I brought them to you one at a time? That way it wouldn't be such a big expense all at once, and you could work on them as you have time." It was a practical suggestion, but I sensed there was more to it than simple economics. There was something in the way she looked at me when she made the offer, something that made my pulse quicken. That could work, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. And that's how it started. Every 2 weeks, Angela would appear at my door with another chair, and what began as simple business transactions gradually became something else entirely. The second chair came with stories. As I worked on repairing a loose joint, Angela told me about the family dinners of her childhood, about her grandmother's insistence on using the good china even for everyday meals because, as she put it, every day you're alive is a good day. The third chair arrived with homemade cookies and an invitation to take a break from work. We sat on my small balcony, drinking coffee and watching the afternoon light shift across the rooftops of the neighborhood. Angela told me about Portland, about the job she'd left behind, about her decision to come home. I was good at what I did, she said, but I wasn't happy. I was helping companies sell things people didn't really need, creating desire for the sake of profit. It felt empty after a while. What made you realize that? I asked. She was quiet for a moment, staring out at the horizon. There was this campaign I worked on for a furniture company. They wanted to market these cheap, disposable pieces as heirloom quality. The whole thing was about convincing people to buy furniture they'd throw away in 5 years and call it an investment in their family's future. I kept thinking about my grandmother's chairs, about how they've been part of our family for 70 years, and I just couldn't do it anymore. By the time the fourth chair arrived, our conversations had moved beyond business and into something more personal. Angela would often arrive in the early evening, after I'd finished my regular work for the day, and we'd talk while I worked on her family's furniture. She'd sit cross-legged on my workshop floor, sometimes helping by holding pieces in place or handing me tools, sometimes just talking. I learned that she'd been engaged briefly in Portland to a man named Gregory who worked in tech and had strong opinions about everything from wine to politics to the proper way to load a dishwasher. The relationship had ended when Angela realized she was changing herself to fit his expectations rather than growing into who she wanted to become. He wasn't a bad person, she said one evening while I was carefully gluing a split in a chair rail. But being with him felt like wearing clothes that were the wrong size. Everything looked fine from the outside, but nothing felt comfortable. I understood that feeling more than I cared to admit. I'd had my own share of relationships that looked right on paper but felt wrong in reality. There was something about Angela's honesty, her willingness to examine her own choices without making excuses, that made me want to be equally honest with her. I told her about my ex-girlfriend Sharon, who'd wanted me to give up furniture restoration and focus on more lucrative graphic design work. She'd seen my workshop as a hobby that was getting in the way of real success. And eventually, I'd had to choose between the work I loved and the woman I thought I loved. You chose the work, Angela observed. It wasn't a question. I did, I said, and I've never regretted it, but I've wondered sometimes if that makes me selfish. Angela was quiet for a moment, watching me sand a rough spot on the chair's armrest. Then she said, I don't think it's selfish to choose authenticity. I think it's brave. The fifth chair came with an invitation. Angela's mother was hosting a dinner party for some old friends, and they needed an extra person to round out the table. Would I be interested in joining them? I almost said no. Dinner parties weren't really my thing, and I worried about fitting in with Angela's family's social circle. But something in the way she asked, a slight nervousness that matched my own, made me realize this was important to her. The dinner was at the Reyes house, and I arrived to find a table set with the restored chairs, each one gleaming in the candlelight. Julie had prepared an elaborate meal, and the other guests were a mix of family friends and neighbors, all people who had known Angela since she was young. I was nervous at first, worried about being the outsider, but Angela made sure I felt included in every conversation. She had a gift for drawing connections between people, for finding the threads that linked different experiences and interests. When one of the guests mentioned struggling to find someone to restore an antique desk, Angela immediately brought me into the conversation. When another talked about starting a small business, she connected their challenges to things we discussed about authentic marketing and genuine customer relationships. Watching her work that room, I realized that Angela's talent wasn't just in marketing, it was in seeing people clearly and helping them see themselves and each other more clearly too. After dinner, while the other guests moved to the living room, Angela and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen, clearing dishes and wrapping leftovers. That was really nice, I told her. Thank you for including me. Thank you for coming, she said. I know dinner parties aren't everyone's idea of fun. It was fun, I said, and I meant it. Your family's great. Your friends are interesting. She smiled, but there was something wistful in her expression. Sometimes I forget what it's like to be around people who've known you forever. They see you as who you were, not necessarily who you're becoming. Who are you becoming? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment before answering. Someone who's not afraid to want things, I think. Someone who's willing to take risks for the right reasons. There was something in the way she said it, something in the way she was looking at me, that made the air in the kitchen feel charged with possibility. But before either of us could say anything more, Larry wandered in looking for more coffee, and the moment passed. The sixth chair arrived on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Angela showed up at my door soaked through, laughing at herself for forgetting an umbrella. I gave her one of my flannel shirts to wear while her jacket dried, and she looked so natural in my clothes, sitting in my workshop with her hair damp and curling around her face, that I had to concentrate extra hard on the repair work to keep my hands steady. We'd fallen into an easy rhythm by then. She'd arrive, we'd talk while I worked, and then we'd order takeout, or she'd cook something simple on my small stove. These evenings had become the highlight of my weeks, something I looked forward to from the moment she left until the moment she returned. That night, she told me about her plans for the consulting business. She'd been meeting with potential clients, small business owners who needed help telling their stories. There was a local bakery that had been family-owned for 3 generations, but was struggling to compete with chain stores. A bookshop that specialized in local authors and community events, but couldn't figure out how to reach new customers. A craftsman who made beautiful leather goods, but had no idea how to market them. These are the businesses that matter, she said, her eyes lighting up as she talked. They're not trying to get rich quick or dominate markets. They're trying to do good work and serve their communities. They just need help figuring out how to tell people about it. Listening to her talk about her work, I realized that Angela and I shared something fundamental. We both believed in the value of things made with care, in the importance of craftsmanship and authenticity. We both wanted to spend our time on work that mattered, even if it wasn't the most profitable path. You should do it, I told her. Start the business. I want to, she said. But it's scary, leaving the security of a regular paycheck, putting yourself out there like that. Everything worthwhile is scary, I said. That's how you know it matters. She looked at me with that expression I was beginning to recognize, the one that made me feel like she was seeing something in me that I didn't always see in myself. Is that why you left graphic design, she asked? Because it wasn't scary enough? I laughed. No, it was scary in all the wrong ways. Scary because I was afraid I'd wake up in 20 years and realize I'd spent my life making things I didn't care about for people who didn't care about me. And furniture restoration doesn't scare you. It terrifies me, I admitted. Every piece I work on is someone's treasure, someone's history. If I mess it up, I'm not just ruining furniture. I'm damaging memories, breaking connections to the past. But it's the good kind of fear, the kind that keeps you careful and focused. Angela nodded slowly. I think I understand that. It's like the difference between being afraid of failing and being afraid of not trying. Exactly, I said. That night, after we'd finished eating and the chair repair was complete, Angela didn't immediately gather her things to leave like she usually did. Instead, she settled back into the chair she'd been sitting in, tucking her legs under her. Can I ask you something, she said. Of course. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd met earlier? Like if I hadn't left town right after high school, or if you'd been around when I came back for visits? I'd been wondering the same thing, but hearing her voice the question made my heart speed up. I don't know, I said carefully. Do you? Sometimes, she said. I wonder if we would have been ready for each other back then, or if we needed to become who we are now before we could appreciate what this is. What is this? I asked, and immediately regretted the question. It sounded too eager, too desperate, but Angela didn't seem put off by it. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. I think it's two people who see each other clearly, she said finally, who appreciate the same things, who want similar kinds of lives. I think it's rare and worth protecting. Worth protecting. The phrase stuck with me long after she'd gone home that night. It suggested something precious but fragile, something that needed care and attention to survive. The seventh chair came with a confession. Angela arrived on a Saturday afternoon looking nervous, fidgeting with the strap of her purse as I examined the piece she'd brought. This one's not actually broken, she said as I looked for damage that wasn't there. I looked up at her, confused. What do you mean? I mean, I've been bringing you chairs that don't really need repair because I wanted an excuse to keep seeing you, she said in a rush. This one just has a small scratch on the arm, something I could probably fix myself with a little furniture polish. I set the chair down and looked at her, trying to process what she just told me. You've been making up reasons to come here? She nodded, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I know it's ridiculous. I'm 32 years old and I'm acting like a teenager with a crush. But I didn't know how else to spend time with you without making it weird. I started laughing and Angela looked mortified until she realized I wasn't laughing at her. Angela, I said, I've been dragging out the repair work for weeks. That third chair, I could have fixed it in 2 hours, but I spent 6 days on it because I didn't want you to stop coming around. Really? She said, and the relief in her voice was palpable. Really, I said, I've been looking forward to these evenings so much that I started scheduling my other work around them. You've become the best part of my week. So we're both ridiculous, she said, grinning now. Completely ridiculous, I agreed. That afternoon, we abandoned any pretense of working on furniture. Instead, we drove out to the lake on the edge of town and walked the trails that wound around the shoreline. It was late November and the trees were bare, but the afternoon light on the water was beautiful, and having Angela beside me made everything feel more vivid somehow. We talked about everything and nothing, the way you do when you're comfortable with someone and don't feel the need to impress them. Angela told me about her favorite books, about places she wanted to travel, about her complicated relationship with her hometown. I told her about my dreams of maybe opening a proper workshop someday, about the pieces of furniture I'd love to create from scratch, about my fear that I was too set in my ways to ever really share my life with someone. You're not set in your ways, she said as we sat on a bench overlooking the water. You're just selective. There's a difference. How do you know? I asked. Because you let me into your space, your routine, your work. You wouldn't do that if you were really closed off. As we walked back to the car, Angela slipped her hand into mine, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Her fingers were cold from the November air, but her palm was warm against mine. The 8th chair never made it to my workshop. Instead, Angela called me on a Tuesday evening in early December, her voice tight with frustration. My mother decided to surprise me by having the rest of the chairs professionally refinished, she said. She hired some guy with a shop across town. They looked like they came off a factory line now, all the character stripped away. I could hear the disappointment in her voice, and I wished I could do something to fix it. I'm sorry, I said. I know how much those chairs meant to you. It's not just the chairs, she said. It's that she didn't ask me. She just assumed I'd be happy with whatever she decided. Sometimes I think she still sees me as the 18-year-old who left for college, not the adult I've become. Want to come over? I asked. We could order pizza, watch something mindless on television. Actually, she said, would you want to come here? Larry's out with friends and Mom's at her book club. I could cook something and we could just talk. I'd never been to the Reyes house when it was just Angela there, and walking into the quiet kitchen felt different somehow, more intimate. She was making pasta with a simple tomato sauce, moving around the familiar space with easy confidence. I'm sorry about the chairs, I said again, settling onto one of the stools at the kitchen island. It's okay, she said, stirring the sauce. Actually, it's probably for the best. I was running out of excuse to see you anyway. You don't need excuses anymore, I told her. She looked up from the stove, meeting my eyes. Don't I? There was a question in her voice, something that needed an answer. I got up from the stool and moved around the island to where she stood, close enough that I could smell her shampoo, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. No, I said quietly, you don't. For a moment, we just looked at each other, and I could feel the weight of all the conversations we'd had, all the evenings we'd spent getting to know each other, all the careful steps we'd taken toward this moment. Then Angela reached up and touched my face, her fingertips tracing the line of my jaw, and I leaned down to kiss her. It was a soft kiss, tentative at first, then deeper as she responded. She tasted like the wine she'd been sipping while cooking, and when she pulled back, she was smiling. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, she whispered. Only weeks? I said, and she laughed. Okay, months, she admitted. We ate dinner at the kitchen table, the one surrounded by the chairs I'd restored, and it felt like a celebration of sorts. Not just of this new development between us, but of all the time we'd spent getting to know each other, all the careful foundation we'd built. After dinner, we moved to the living room and Angela put on some music, something soft and jazzy that filled the comfortable silence between us. We sat together on the couch, her head resting against my shoulder, and I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. Timothy, she said quietly. Yeah? I want you to know that whatever this becomes, it's not just because I'm back home and feeling nostalgic or lonely or anything like that. It's because of who you are, because of how you make me feel when I'm with you. How do I make you feel? I asked. Like myself, she said. Like the best version of myself. I tightened my arms around her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You make me feel like I'm enough, I told her. Like I don't need to be anything other than what I am. We stayed like that for a long time, listening to the music and talking quietly about everything and nothing. When I finally left that night, it was with the understanding that something fundamental had shifted between us, that we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross, and I didn't want to uncross it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing intimacy. Angela would stop by my workshop after her meetings with potential clients, and we'd grab dinner together or take walks around the neighborhood. I'd pick her up for coffee on weekend mornings, and we'd spend hours talking about our plans, our dreams, our fears. We were careful not to rush things, both of us aware that what we had was special and worth protecting. But there was an undeniable pull between us, a sense that we were meant to be together in a way that went beyond simple attraction. One evening in mid-December, Angela showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a mischievous grin. What's the occasion? I asked, letting her in. I got my first client, she said, practically bouncing with excitement. The bakery I told you about, they want me to help them rebrand and develop a marketing strategy. It's not a huge contract, but it's enough to get started. I swept her up in a hug, spinning her around my small living space. That's incredible, I said. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you, she said when I set her down. All those conversations we had about authentic work, about doing things that matter, they gave me the courage to really go for it. We opened the wine and toasted to new beginnings, to taking risks, to the future we were building together. As the evening wore on, the conversation grew more intimate, more charged with possibility. I love watching you work, Angela said as we sat together on my couch. There's something about the way you handle the wood, the care you take with every detail. It's like watching someone pray. I'd never thought of my work in those terms, but hearing her describe it that way made me see it differently. Maybe it was a kind of prayer, a way of honoring the past while creating something for the future. I love watching you think, I told her. The way you consider things from every angle before you speak, the way you really listen when people talk. You make everyone around you feel heard. Angela set down her wine glass and moved closer to me on the couch. Timothy, she said, and there was something different in her voice. Something that made my pulse quicken. Yeah? I want to stay tonight, she said simply, if you want me to. I looked at her, this woman who had become so important to me so quickly, and felt a rush of emotion that was part desire, part tenderness, part something deeper that I wasn't ready to name yet. I want you to, I said. That night, we crossed another line, and it was everything I'd hoped it would be. Gentle and passionate, familiar and surprising all at once. Afterward, lying together in my narrow bed, Angela traced patterns on my chest with her fingertips. I never expected this, she said quietly. What? To find someone who gets it, who understands what matters, to feel this connected to another person. I know what you mean, I said. It feels like we've been moving toward each other for a long time, even before we met. Christmas came and went in a warm blur of family dinners and quiet moments together. Angela's mother had accepted our relationship with enthusiasm, immediately beginning to treat me like a member of the family. Larry, for his part, seemed genuinely happy that his friend and his sister had found each other, though he made several jokes about keeping his furniture away from both of us. On New Year's Eve, Angela and I drove out to the lake where we'd walk that first afternoon together. We brought a thermos of hot chocolate and a blanket, and we sat by the water watching the stars and talking about the year ahead. I have something to tell you, Angela said as midnight approached. That sounds ominous, I replied, though her tone was excited rather than worried. I got offered a job, she said. A good one, marketing director for a sustainable furniture company based in Seattle. It would be a chance to work for a company whose values really align with mine, to help them grow while staying true to their mission. My heart sank even as I tried to be happy for her. That's amazing, I said, and I meant it, even though the thought of her leaving made my chest tight. The thing is, she continued, I don't want to take it. Why not, I asked, confused. Because my life is here now. My business is just getting started. My family is here, and most importantly, you're here. I don't want to start over somewhere else when I'm finally building something real where I am. I looked at her, this incredible woman who was choosing to stay, choosing us, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude and love. Are you sure? I asked. It sounds like an incredible opportunity. It is, she said, but so is this. So are we. And I'd rather build something with you than chase something perfect somewhere else. As the clock struck midnight and fireworks lit up the sky over the lake, I kissed Angela and whispered that I loved her. She whispered it back, and I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. The new year brought changes for both of us. Angela's consulting business began to grow as word spread about her work with the bakery. She helped them develop a marketing campaign that focused on their family history and commitment to traditional baking methods, and their sales increased by 30% in the first quarter. I, meanwhile, found myself busier than ever with restoration work. Angela had introduced me to several of her clients who needed help with vintage furniture for their businesses, and I was starting to think seriously about expanding my operation. One evening in February, as we sat in my workshop planning our respective futures, Angela made a suggestion that surprised me. What if we combined our businesses, she said. You could handle the restoration and custom work, and I could help you market your services, tell your story. We could find a larger space, set up a proper showroom. The idea was appealing, but it also scared me. Working together would mean intertwining our professional lives with our personal relationship in a way that could be complicated. What if it doesn't work? I asked. What if mixing business and personal stuff ruins what we have? Angela considered this seriously the way she considered everything. It's a risk, she said finally. But I think we're good enough together, trust each other enough, that we could make it work. Besides, we're already talking about each other's work all the time anyway. This would just make it official. Over the next few weeks, we developed the idea further. We found a space in the Arts District, a former warehouse with good light and enough room for both a workshop and a showroom. We worked with a small business loan officer to secure financing, and Angela created a business plan that impressed everyone who saw it. By spring, Bennett and Miller Restoration and Design was becoming a reality. We spent weekends fixing up our new space, painting walls, and installing lighting. Angela designed a logo that perfectly captured what we were trying to do. Elegant but approachable, traditional but not stuffy. The grand opening was scheduled for May, and as the date approached, I found myself nervous in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about starting a business. It was about committing to a future with Angela in a very public way. What if people don't get it? I asked her one evening as we put the finishing touches on the showroom displays. What if they think we're just playing house with a business? Then they don't understand what we're about, Angela said simply, and they're not our customers anyway. She was right, of course. The people who would appreciate what we were doing would understand that our relationship was part of what made our work authentic. We weren't just business partners who happened to be dating. We were two people who shared a vision of what good work looked like. The opening was a success beyond our wildest dreams. The space was packed with friends, family, potential customers, and other local business owners. People seemed genuinely excited about what we were offering, a combination of expert restoration work and thoughtful design services. Julie Cox gave a speech about how proud she was of both of us, and Larry presented us with a bottle of champagne and a card that read, "To my sister and my friend, who figured out that the best partnerships are built on more than just business." But the moment that meant the most to me came near the end of the evening, when an elderly woman approached our display of restored dining chairs, the ones that had started everything between Angela and me. "These are beautiful," she said, running her hand along the smooth wood. "They remind me of chairs my grandmother had when I was little." "They probably came from the same era," Angela said, moving to stand beside the woman. "Each piece has its own history, its own story to tell." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "I have a set of chairs at home that belonged to my mother. They're in terrible shape, but I can't bear to throw them away. Do you think they could be saved?" I examined the photos she showed us on her phone, chairs that were indeed in rough condition, but clearly well made originally. "We can save them," I told her. It'll take time and care, but they can be beautiful again. As we scheduled a consultation and the woman left with a smile on her face, I realized that this was what it was all about. Not just restoring furniture, but restoring connections, helping people preserve the things that mattered to them. Summer brought a steady stream of customers and projects. We restored antique desks for home offices, refinished dining sets for young families, and created custom pieces for clients who wanted something unique. Angela's marketing expertise helped us reach people who valued craftsmanship and authenticity, and my skills ensured that every piece that left our workshop was something we could be proud of. Working together turned out to be everything we'd hoped and none of what we'd feared. We complemented each other perfectly, Angela handling the client relationships and business development, while I focused on the hands-on work. When disagreements arose, we talked them through with the same honesty and respect we'd always shown each other. One particularly busy Tuesday in July, Angela was meeting with a potential client while I worked on refinishing a cedar chest that had been damaged in a basement flood. The work was delicate, requiring patience and precision to restore the wood without losing its character. I was so focused on what I was doing that I didn't notice Angela's client had left until she appeared beside my workbench. "How did it go?" I asked, not looking up from the piece I was sanding. "Really well," she said. "They want us to restore an entire dining room set, plus they're interested in commissioning a custom hutch to match." "That's fantastic," I said, finally setting down my sandpaper and looking at her. "You're incredible at this. You know that?" "We're incredible at this," she corrected, leaning against the workbench. "I couldn't do what I do without knowing that you'll deliver on every promise I make." It was true, and it was one of the things I loved most about our partnership. We'd built something together that was stronger than either of us could have created alone. As summer turned to fall, we began talking about the future in more concrete terms. We'd been together almost a year, and our business was thriving. Angela had moved most of her things into my apartment above the hardware store, though we'd been looking at houses with enough space for both of us to live and work comfortably. One evening in October, as we sat in our showroom after closing, surrounded by the fruits of our labor, Angela brought up something that had been on both our minds. "I've been thinking about the long term," she said. "About where we want this to go, both the business and us." I'd been thinking about the same thing, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think we should buy a house," she said. "Something with a big workshop space, maybe room for a proper showroom eventually. I think we should plan for the future like we're going to be in it together." "I think so too," I said, and the relief in her voice told me she'd been nervous about bringing it up. We spent the next few weeks looking at properties and eventually found a craftsman-style house on the outskirts of town with a detached garage that could be converted into an ideal workshop. It needed work, but it had good bones and plenty of potential. The day we signed the papers, we celebrated with dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first real date, back when we were still pretending the chair repairs were just business. "Do you ever think about how different things would be if Larry hadn't broken that chair?" Angela asked as we shared dessert. "All the time," I said. "But I also think we would have found each other eventually. Some things are just meant to happen." "You really believe that?" she asked. "I do," I said. "I believe we were moving toward each other long before we met, that everything we'd both been through was preparing us for this." Angela reached across the table and took my hand. "I love you, Timothy Bennett," she said. "I love the life we're building together." "I love you too," I said, more than I ever thought possible. Moving into the new house that winter was like starting a whole new chapter. We converted the garage into a workshop that was everything I'd ever dreamed of, with proper ventilation, excellent lighting, and enough space for multiple projects. Angela set up a home office where she could meet with clients and manage the business side of our operation. But it was the small domestic moments that meant the most to me. Making coffee together in the morning, cooking dinner side by side in our new kitchen, falling asleep next to Angela every night, knowing that this was our home, our life, our future. One snowy evening in December, almost exactly a year after our first kiss, I was working late in the workshop when Angela appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "What are you working on?" she asked, settling onto the stool beside my workbench. "A surprise," I said, covering the piece I'd been carving with a cloth. "For who?" she asked, curious. "For you," I said. "For Christmas." She tried to peek under the cloth, but I blocked her view. "No looking," I said. "You'll have to wait." What I was making was a jewelry box, carved from a piece of cherry wood I'd been saving for something special. It was small and simple, with clean lines and a smooth finish, but I'd carved her initials into the lid with a delicate flourish that had taken me hours to perfect. But more than that, I'd been thinking about what I wanted to put inside it. Christmas morning arrived with a fresh snowfall that made everything look clean and new. We exchanged gifts by the fireplace in our living room, surrounded by the furniture we'd restored together and the life we'd built. Angela loved the jewelry box, running her fingers over the smooth wood and the carved initials. "It's beautiful," she said. "But why is it so heavy?" I smiled nervously. "Open it," I said. Inside, nestled in the velvet lining I'd installed, was a simple gold ring with a small diamond. Nothing flashy or ostentatious, just something beautiful and lasting, like what we'd built together. Angela looked at the ring, then at me, her eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been tears. "Timothy," she whispered. I got down on one knee beside the fireplace, taking her hands in mine. "Angela Miller," I said, "you've made me happier than I ever thought I could be. You've shown me what it means to build something real with someone, to create a life that matters. Will you marry me?" She was crying now, but she was also smiling. And when she said yes, it was with a certainty that matched my own. We were married the following October in the backyard of our house, surrounded by friends and family and the furniture we'd restored together. Julie Cox cried through the entire ceremony, and Larry gave a speech about how he'd always known his sister and his friend were perfect for each other, even before they knew it themselves. But the moment that meant the most to me came during our first dance, when Angela whispered in my ear, "I can't believe how lucky we are. Lucky to have found each other. Lucky to have built something beautiful together. Lucky to have learned that the best things in life are worth waiting for, worth working for, worth protecting." 3 years later, Bennett and Miller Restoration and Design had become one of the most respected businesses in our area. We'd expanded into custom furniture making, and Angela had developed a reputation as one of the best small business consultants in the region. We'd bought the building that housed our original showroom and workshop, and we were talking about hiring our first employee. But success hadn't changed what mattered most to us. We still worked side by side every day, still talked through every decision together, still found joy in the simple act of taking something broken and making it whole again. One afternoon in late spring, I was working on a particularly challenging restoration, a 19th century secretary desk that had been badly damaged in a house fire. The piece was important to the client, a family heirloom that had belonged to several generations of women, and I wanted to get it exactly right. Angela was in her office on a call with a potential client, and I could hear her voice through the open door, explaining our philosophy, our process, the care we took with every piece. After she finished the call, she came into the workshop and leaned against my workbench, watching me work. "What?" I asked, noticing her smile. "Nothing," she said. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. Do you remember that first day I came here about my grandmother's chair?" "Of course I remember," I said. "You were so nervous, and I was covered in sawdust." "You're still covered in sawdust," she pointed out, laughing. "Some things never change," I said, pulling her closer and kissing her despite the sawdust. "And some things do," she said, "in all the best ways." That evening, as we sat on our back porch watching the sunset and planning our next day's work, Angela told me something that made my heart skip a beat. "I have some news," she said, and there was something in her voice that made me pay attention. "Good news or bad news?" I asked. "The best news," she said, taking my hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. It took me a moment to understand what she was telling me, and when I did, I felt a rush of emotion so strong it took my breath away. "Really?" I whispered. "Really," she said, and she was crying and laughing at the same time. "We're going to have a baby," I said, and it felt like a miracle. "We're going to have a baby," she confirmed. That night, lying in bed with Angela curled against my side, I thought about the future we were creating together. A child who would grow up surrounded by the things we'd made with our hands, who would learn the value of craftsmanship and authenticity, who would understand that the best things in life are built slowly, with patience and love. I thought about the workshop we'd set up, the business we'd built, the marriage we'd created through daily choices to love and support each other. I thought about how all of it had started with a broken chair and a chance encounter, with two people who were brave enough to be honest about what they wanted. And I realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not a single perfect moment, but a series of ordinary days made extraordinary by love, by work that mattered, by the simple act of building something beautiful with someone you cherished. Angela stirred in her sleep, and I pressed a kiss to her hair, breathing in the scent that had become as familiar to me as my own. Tomorrow we'd wake up and make coffee together, and I'd go to the workshop while she handled the business calls, and we'd work side by side creating something meaningful. But tonight, I just held my wife and our future, grateful for every broken chair and every second chance, for every risk we'd taken and every choice we'd made that had led us to this moment. Because sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary moments. Sometimes the best things in life start with someone leaning against a refrigerator and whispering that you have time. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that time turns into forever.